Well, good morning, WellHouse Church. Pastor Cullen here. Excited to be back with you for another week of storytelling through the book of Acts. And I'll be honest, this has been a very strange week of content to try to produce. I thought I was going to be able to record it on Friday. I wasn't. I had content block, and then I ran out of time, and then yesterday it was a crazy day, and then so I'm actually filming this the morning that it's going to be released. And as I've been pondering and thinking about the things that I wanted to say here, I realized that I think the reason that this is so difficult is because, number one, it's just not a lot of story. It's not a ton of story to work with in the text. But it also deals with concepts that directly relate to the very core parts of my being. You know, I have a work and money addiction. It's just part of it. I think we're working on it in therapy, but I think where that comes from and is rooted in is growing up poor. When you grow up poor and you don't have anything, and you're like me, a go-getter, you want to ensure that you and anyone connected to you never feel that way again. And so work becomes this medium, this vehicle through which we get money, which is the thing that buys food and makes sure that we continue to survive. Well, what that looks like a lot of times is that work becomes survival. Specifically in American culture, this is true. People work in order to survive. Well, today, in our story through the book of Acts, we're going to look at these same concepts of work and survival, but when they're placed at odds with one another, as when in other cultures, work and survival are not synonymous. Work is something that you do, and survival is another task that you do. But for us, a lot of us in American culture, and the way in which we prize productivity and efficiency and wealth and more, and the pursuit of more, work and survival become one and one because we think that survival is not survival, survival is thriving. We have to be the best in order to be surviving. Paul gives us another way to look at it. And it's quite meaningful to me. You know, I just told you that I have a work and money addiction. I think Paul's words are quite impactful, and Paul's example and dedication are quite impactful to us in our lives today, even as we read this story 2,000 years later. So let me tell you this story. Paul's been on trial for multiple years now for some trumped up charges against the Jews. And Paul has asked, as a Roman citizen, to be transferred to have a hearing before the emperor. So Paul sets sail. And he starts his journey from Caesarea, where he was with the governor, to Rome. And on his way, they stop in this little town in a port city, and Paul has this conversation with the centurion. The centurion is the senior soldier on the ship that Paul is being protected and transported under. And Paul says, hey, I don't think we should make this next leg of this journey because it's going to be too dangerous. Sailing in the ancient world is dangerous. But there's this great line. This is in 27:11. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. Now, a centurion, a paid soldier, a pilot, a paid pilot of said ship, and the owner of said ship. 3 men that embody the concept of work. They choose work over survival. Paul's telling them, hey, I don't think we should do this. That doesn't look right. We're probably going to lose our lives. They choose work over survival. To be fair, this is oftentimes what I and many others are guilty of. I can think of a few times in my marriage where before I got divorced, when we were living together, and there would be times where I would need to step up and be present or try to make my marriage work or survive, and I would choose work over survival. It's very unhealthy, but unfortunately, as the centurion and these other people help embody for us, we all do it. And so the story goes on. And they continue, and they go out on this journey, and they hit a storm. And that storm is so bad that they don't see the sun or the stars for multiple days. Just sheer darkness and storm. And as they are fighting through this storm, Paul gets this vision that he has to go before the emperor in Rome, and so no one is going to be harmed. The cargo, and there will be loss and damage and those kinds of things, but people, humans will not be harmed. And so then it says there's been 14 days. So 14 days of them fighting in this storm with no food. Might remind you, they're not eating during this time. So they're in the middle of a storm, they're not eating, and they haven't seen the sun in multiple days. And so they pray. Because you see, unfortunately, people that are focused on work, they don't need faith, because they're going to provide their own faith and survival. So if they are going to provide that, you don't need faith. So you don't have a prayer to pray. Here we get a shift. Now they're starting to listen to Paul, and they begin to pray. And so when Paul comes back to them at one point and says, hey, if anybody leaves this ship, because they start trying to get the little boat out to let people out. He says, hey, if anybody leaves this ship, I can't protect them. God's going to protect me and anybody that's on the ship. And so they listen. They cut the boat away and let it drift, and they stay on the ship. They begin to listen to Paul. They begin to choose survival over work. They begin to see that they're not synonymous. And so then Paul has this moment. In a moment where he's got these people questioning what it means to work and survive, Paul has this scene. Just before daybreak, Paul urged all of them to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you've been in suspense and remaining without food, having eaten nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will help you survive. For none of you will lose a hair from your heads. After he said this, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then all of them were encouraged and took food for themselves. All of them took food for themselves. Work and survival. What are the things that help with survival? Food. Food. Yes. Work provides that to you. Work does give you the source of money for yourself. But what if we changed our framework? What if work didn't give us that? What if God gave us that? That is how Paul seems to view it. Because you see, Paul has all of them eat, and he has this long speech, and he encourages them, and he uses this same form of taking and breaking and giving that Jesus uses when he introduces food narratives. So he does all of this. There are 276 people on this ship. That's what the text says. 276 persons in the ship. And so they eat. And it's not about work anymore. The workers are beginning to listen to Paul. And the survival is about the words of Paul and the actions of Paul. So Paul's not listening to the workers. Paul's not being a worker. And yet Paul is providing food. Because Paul is not looking at work as his source of survival. Paul is looking at God as his source of survival. And as proof, Paul feeds them and eats this bread. And then the text says, after they had satisfied their hunger, they lightened the ship by throwing the wheat into the sea. No more food. Now I'm all on an unknown survival that I'm trusting a God to give me. Because work is not the source of survival. God is the source of survival. And so, WellHouse Church, my question to you today is a quite simple one. It has to do with the way in which we have relationships with work. Do we look at work as our survival? Do we look at work as our motivation? Or do we look at God as our survival and motivation? Are we trusting that God is provider and sustainer of our lives? And if so, then work is not the thing that yields us survival. God yields us survival. So, WellHouse Church, how will we better trust God for our survival?